Welcome to Real Estate Investing Abundance, the show for busy, fulfilled professionals like you to learn how to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alan Lomax.
Hello, enlightened investors. Happy to be back with you again today. I'm your host, Dr. Alan. I know you'll enjoy today's show, and I have a big ask that will only take a moment of your time. Ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of our podcast. To leave a review and a rating, iPhone or other Apple iOS device users, go to Apple Podcasts or iTunes. For all you non-Apple device users, go to podchasers.com. On either site, search for Real Estate Investing Abundance. Once you find us, leave both a review and a rating. Subscriptions are also vital to the show's success, so please be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app. It's free to subscribe, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Enlightened investors, our guest takes us on a journey from 0 to 100 in 5 years. He is a Maine real estate triple threat, syndicator, property manager, and commercial broker. He specializes in green energy and renting to refugees. I am excited to discover how our guest puts sustainability and assisting refugees at the forefront of a successful investment strategy. Welcome, Dave Holman. Dave, start us off by sharing an experience from your formative years that helped you to be the person you are today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alan. I'm excited to be here and happy to share one that comes to mind. So I became a cross-country runner in junior high, and I was extremely slow. I remember losing a race. Not many people have won a race, but not many people have actually lost and been the absolute last finisher in a race. And that was me when I started. But by the time I got to high school and started training, learning to drink water and stuff, I got better and better until I was pretty good. I was on our varsity team, and we were the best team in the state, and we were in the state championship meet, and we were trying to win it all. And I got pretty excited. And so I went out a little too fast. And where I normally would have run like a 5:30 mile or a 5:45, I was probably at a 4:50 or something for the first mile, just way too fast. And I was in the top 10 or something where I should have been back in the 30 or 40th spot where I belonged. But no. And I made it through the second mile. I might have slowed down a little bit. In the third mile of this 5K race, I was still going. And I was in, 12th, 15th place. I mean, something where I had no right to be. And all of a sudden I hit the wall, and my body just didn't have energy. And it felt like I was going in slow motion, and I managed, and I literally had to crawl across the finish line. And I finished right about in, 40th where I belonged, or 30, whatever. But I got a free trip to the hospital because everyone thought this kid's in some kind of serious health trouble, which I was. I recovered fine. There was nothing wrong with me other than I just hit the wall and pushed myself too hard. And so that is a good lesson, I think, for real estate investing. And I've since learned to run slower, and I start out races deliberately slow so that I can speed up by the middle. And then by the end, I'm feeling good and I can finish on my feet, and I'm not scaring friends and family with my heart racing too fast. So that's a lesson from the early years that I think applies to real estate is pace yourself.
Good lesson. What I'm curious about is you started off in junior high school and you were the slowest. What in the world motivated you to continue with cross country with such a dismal start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just kind of didn't want to give up. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was to not disappoint parents or friends or myself. I think it was more internal, the motivation to continue. I had a great coach who was very caring and motivating, and she wasn't beating up on us slow runners, and was just trying to cultivate a love of the sport in the students that she had as a coach. Plus, I had friends in the team. I liked being with them. It was more of a social atmosphere. So I think that's what kept me going. It wasn't that I thought I was ever going to be good or that I cared about that as much. And when I eventually got good, I think it was about the friendships and the team experience as much as it was about the competition.
Well, interesting. Dave, talk to us about your background, how you got into real estate. Where did it all begin?
Yeah, some seeds were planted early on, but I had no family background in it. Grew up middle class with one single house that we lived in, and that was it. But I became an entrepreneur fairly early after college. I was down in South America and started a chain of bookstores and camping stores with my then girlfriend, now wife, who's Bolivian. Not what I expected to be doing in life, but I enjoyed it. It's an adventure. It's a treasure hunt. It's really fun to be running your own business. We rented our storefronts from landowners, but it occurred to me during that time, is like, this $500 a month we're paying in rent, it'd be really nice to pay that to a bank to own this place, because it'd be the same basic payment. I compared the sale prices of commercial condos and stuff to rents, and I was like, hey, wait a minute, it's the same amount of money every month for a very different situation economically, but never went any further than that. And it really took my wife getting pregnant with our first child. I was working in nonprofit fundraising at the time, and I had done a little bit of passive investing, and I'd encouraged our family. We went together and invested in a single family rental home in 2013. Nothing more exciting than one rental house and one passive investment up to that point for me. But when my wife got pregnant, I was like, it's all well and good to earn a low nonprofit salary and save the world when you're young and you don't have responsibilities and commitments. It's another when you have kids and you need to be providing for them, have disposable income for their future and that sort of thing. So I decided I had done stock investing on the side, and that's all well and good, but you're not probably going to get rich off it, and it doesn't provide much of an income for you. So I decided to study something else, and I came upon real estate, started learning about it, but I still had this mental inhibition that it's like used car sales, where it's only bad, evil landlords that are in real estate, and it's not a upright, clean profession to be in, which was a prejudice I don't know where I picked up in society. It's not like I was taught that or something directly by my parents. But what encouraged me, or got me to think I could do this, is that I'd learned a lot about climate change, about how wasteful the built environment often is when you build buildings without good insulation in climates that really need it, when you're using bad energy systems to heat them that are wasteful. And it's that fundamental entrepreneurial urge to not waste anything. I think that's what encourages people to be efficient. So I thought, it's all well and good if I change my own house and make my own house better insulated, even use solar panels or whatever. That's not going to change the world or help climate change directly. Whereas if I can do that to other people's houses, now, wait a minute, if I own 10 of these, I could do 10 different houses. And now you're starting to move the needle a little bit more, or I could do 100, and I could then teach other investors on how to actually do this profitably. So that allowed me to overcome that mental barrier or inhibition I had towards real estate. And I fell in love with it ever since then. I guess that was 2015. Pretty quickly, I did another single family house with my family, then went out on my own, did a 3-unit mixed use building, then did a 9-unit residential, another 9 and 8, and then eventually started syndicating, which is putting groups of family investors together, because they had money, but no time or expertise. And I had time and expertise, but no money. So it was a great combination. And so we started buying, buildings in the $1 million range and that kind of thing. We did 2 properties like that. And then we did a $3.3 million investment this past year. And we're working on a small one, just a little baby, $1.4 million. And then we're going to do a $5 to $10 million development later this year. So that's the real estate background to bring you up to date.
You skipped a little bit there. Suddenly you were out of college and in South America running a bookstore.
Yeah.
How did you get to South America and in a country not of your birth and speaking a language not of your native language? You opened your own business. That's just a bit astonishing to me. So talk to us about that process.
That's a great question. I did gloss over how that all happens. So I had taken Spanish classes, in school from junior high as my kind of language requirement. And I did okay, but I didn't really learn a lot internally, or I wasn't using it, because in Maine at that time, there just wasn't an easy Spanish-speaking population to interact with. That's since changed a good bit, but it was true then. So and in college, I went to Carleton College out in Minnesota, and they had a similar language kind of requirement. And I took some Spanish classes there. And those were a little more fun for me, but it was really travel that got me excited about Latin America and the language. I traveled to Nicaragua to learn about like factories and sweatshops there, went inside some of those, met people on both sides of that issue. And that was really fascinating. It led me to pursue a major in Latin American studies. My second year of college, I ended up organizing a trip out to an Indian reservation in South Dakota, the Pine Ridge Reservation, and met some different leaders and people there. And it really blew my mind. I had never met Native American people before directly and learned about what they've been through, what their reality's like. And it was just fascinating for me. And also seeing the economic poverty on that reservation was mind-blowing. It was as bad or worse than Nicaragua. You drive by houses that look like they're abandoned and the roof's falling in, and then you realize there's people living there. And it was really alarming, I guess, that here we are calling ourselves a first world country, and we allow and have that kind of poverty existing here in America. But there was also a strength there, and a remarkable kind of spiritual strength of the people that I also hadn't encountered in my own life. And it was this incredible dichotomy of material poverty with spiritual wealth and cultural wealth. And it just fascinated me. So I was like, I need to learn more about Native American people and the kind of economic systems, both that might be keeping them down and also allowing them to rise up. So a different summer, I went out and did an internship on Pine Ridge, met more people, just networked and learned. And then I had studied abroad in Guatemala, which is a similar sort of country where the majority of people are Native American, and got interested in microfinance, which was a new thing in the early 2000s coming onto the scene from when it had first been invented in the 80s. And it was invented simultaneously in Bangladesh and in Bolivia, independently of each other. And so Bolivia has always been this kind of center of microfinance institutions and activity. So me as a Latin American studies major with an increasing interest in economics of indigenous people, I thought I would do my thesis on Bolivian microfinance and see how it affects culture and vice versa. So I went down there for a semester my senior year to study, not expecting to fall in love with anyone, but that's what happened. So I quickly went back down after college because I was like, that was a really good relationship, but it got artificially cut off by me having to leave. I feel like I probably shouldn't leave loose ends in life like that. I might be old and single and wondering what if 30 years from now. So I decided to just open-ended ticket, no return, just see where it was going to go. And we went down and hit it off and traveled together. And we needed some way to earn a little bit of money and keep us together. And the stores grew from that, because in traveling, we just saw this niche where there weren't stores where you could buy a backpack or a tent or a Lonely Planet guidebook or that kind of thing. And we just foolishly jumped in and filled it. And dealing with the Bolivian government entities and local authorities and everything to get set up was interesting. We could fill a whole podcast on some of those stories, but it taught me a lot about how to be successful in business, how to not take no for an answer, and how to try to do the right thing if you can.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor.
Would you ever invest all your money in a single stock? Very unlikely. Yet investors are willing to risk $50,000 to $100,000 in a single property in real estate all the time. Avestor is the world's first customizable real estate investment platform. Investors can build their own custom portfolios selecting investments across multiple asset classes such as single-family homes, multifamily, student housing, self-storage, and shopping centers. You can also invest across multiple markets and different time frames. Avestor also enables other real estate entrepreneurs and syndicators to build and use Avestor's infrastructure and cloud platform to create their own customizable real estate funds. To learn more, visit us at avestorinc.com. Avestor, real estate investing made simple.
What a fascinating way to go from that to investing in real estate. You mentioned, as you were talking earlier, that your first real estate investment was with family members in terms of just a plain old single family rental. And you said it wasn't very exciting, but I remember my first single family rental was really quite exciting for me, as I think it is for a lot of people, because it's like, wow, this is amazing. You can rent a house and actually have some cash flow from it. So to me, it was quite an amazing journey. Talk to us a little bit more about that early single family investing experience.
Yeah. I spent months looking for the right property. I worked with a residential broker in my local market, which at the time was Brunswick. And we went through at least 10 or 20 different houses as potential fits. And I was very green around the ears. I was learning, didn't really know a lot like I know now. And we eventually found one in a town called Yarmouth, where it was on what was going to become a double lot if the new zoning got passed. And so it had this kind of secret bonus to it where you could buy it for the price of a single family house. But if this new zoning happens, oh my gosh, you've got what then was going to be a $50,000 lot, which now would be a $100,000 lot. And it worked. It cash flowed as is. And so we were like, great, let's do it. And I went in, I did a lot of the work to fix it up myself and the new kitchen and repairing floors and things like that. I was very hands-on, rented it out to a nice family who stayed for 3 or 4 years. And then we've rented out to another nice family after that. But it was a big learning experience, and it generates like a whopping $100 to $200 a month in profit, which was not going to make anyone rich. And an important lesson is that the town ended up not passing the zoning just in that area. They did it in a different area. The plans changed and it took several years to happen. What we had originally thought was the upside disappeared, but we held on to it. We've thought about selling it, doing a 1031 exchange or something like that, but are now in the process of refinancing it. And we'll be able to pull out more sort of profit, if you will, or equity from the building than we would have gotten from splitting off and selling a lot. The prices have appreciated because this is a town with one of the top 5 school districts in the state. And I guess that's a lesson I would also share with investors is, at least where we are, prices and appreciation are very correlated with school districts. And if you want cash flow, you can invest anywhere and don't worry about the school district. But if you want appreciation, you might want to go where the district is building new buildings and investing and getting good test scores and that kind of thing, because that's where more affluent folks will compete for housing.
Well, that's an interesting correlation. I hadn't really given much thought to that, but I can see how it could be a good indicator as to where growth is going to go. From that, you've grown and developed, and you have been able to quit the day job.
Yeah.
What happened in that experience?
Yeah, I hung on for a little longer than I would have liked because my day job at Bowdoin College, I had a lot of golden handcuffs, one of which was a great daycare for our kids. And you only get to use the daycare if you work there. And luckily, my wife was willing to get a job at Bowdoin at another department to allow me to finally depart. I was there for 5 years. And by year 3, I knew in my heart, like, this wasn't for me. I don't want to be chained to a desk doing spreadsheets and database work all day. And that's what fundraising is not all wine and cheese socials, unfortunately. There's a lot of behind the scenes work to it to make those $1 million asks or whatever. I enjoyed it a lot, but I knew that I was just more passionate about real estate and I was growing my portfolio at that point. And I decided to jump ship before I had enough passive income coming in to support us. But I knew, so I had to find active income, another job essentially. And I had worked with this buyer's agent as I was buying these properties, who was a great guy, very honest, very good to work with. And he looked like he was having an awful lot of fun doing this stuff. And I was having fun too. And I was like, hey, I could do this real estate agent thing. So I took the exam, got my license while I was still working the full-time job. So for a while, I had 3 or 4 full-time jobs where I was working for Bowdoin College. I was a real estate agent helping a couple friends buy and sell things. I still had 36 units at that point that I was managing the manager of. And so it was a lot on one plate. And as I decided, I think I can make money as a real estate agent and I can build this parachute as I jump. So I quit Bowdoin with a little bit of a few months worth saved up of cushion. And I had a few closings that were going to happen. And I had enough confidence that I could start earning money as a broker to fill in the gap from passive income that I'd make it. And I will have to say the first year, there's a lot of those kind of hold your breath moments. And it's not just a moment, it's weeks of time when you're like, I really don't know how I'm going to have any money in 2 or 3 months from now, but I'm confident in the process and the work I'm doing to figure that out. And it has worked very well. And now the reality has come true where I thought when I was in the job, I think I'll look back and realize I was costing myself a lot of money by not quitting. Because when you're chained to a day job that pays you $50,000 or $100,000, but they demand all your time, you're not able to spend your time doing something that'll earn you $200,000 or $300,000. That's what I've seen happen. Is that indeed when I've gotten rid of that, I've gotten a year's or half.
Enlightened investors, we'll be right back after this important announcement. I have a big ask that will only take a moment of your time. Ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of our podcast.
It takes a lot of
So
hard
to
work.
leave
I
a
don't
review,
think
iPhone
people
or other
should
Apple
think
iOS
passive
device
income
users,
is
go
totally
to Apple
passive. You must have
Podcasts
a lot
or
of money
iTunes.
to start with.
For all
Real
you
estate,
non-Apple
as you're
device
nodding your
users,
head, it's true
go to
that it's very active when you
podchasers.com.
start. You gotta put
On
a lot
either
of work
platform,
in,
search
but
for Real
it's good
Estate
work 'cause
Investing
it's both
Abundance.
work and education.
Once found,
You're learning
please
how
leave a
to guide
review
other
and
people
a
doing it
rating.
later on, so that when you
Subscriptions are
wanna be
also
more
vital to our
passive,
show's success,
manage the
so
manager of the
please be
manager
sure to
and
subscribe on your
know and
favorite
understand
podcast
what's
app.
being done
It
properly.
is free to subscribe, and you can unsubscribe at any time.
I like that you pointed out that it can be passive if you have the money. If you are just starting out in real estate, I don't know of a route that is very passive. Syndicators aren't necessarily out there doing rehabs and what have you, but it takes some time to source and do the underwriting. So you moved from brokerage and you started your own property management company,
Yes.
which is another full-time job. What has that been like? And
Yeah.
why did you do it?
I'll tell you exactly why. It's a good story. So I first started managing the properties I had on my own until we were at 5 or 6 units. And then when I bought a 9-unit building nearby, I was like, I've got a full-time day job. And this 9-unit building comes with a manager who's already managing it, and he would stay on. And he's pretty cheap in the spectrum of management fees. Little did I know, you get what you pay for. But at that time I was like, oh, this is great. And so I started working through him. And I had also bought 2 other buildings that he happened to manage. So I had 27 units with this guy, and I was doing the other 6 or whatever on my own. And I very quickly distinguished a difference in quality, and the turnaround, and units would sit vacant for weeks and weeks or months and months, or the things that I thought should have been reported to me right away would filter through to me weeks after they happened. And it clearly was just not this individual's top priority to manage my units. And they were a broker as well. It got explained to me very clearly of like, if they're earning $200 or $300 a month managing your building, and then they have a closing, will they earn $10,000 in one day? Which do you think they're going to prioritize? And sure enough, there were warning signs that I needed to switch. And so I found another company locally that was 2 women. It looked much more professional. They had branding, they had an office. It was legit and real. So I was like, okay, great. I'll give this whole portfolio to them, and that'll be the greener pasture, because I know I need to work with third-party management and specialize a little more. But I had gotten a lot of my tenants paying electronically with a software called Cozy that some of your listeners probably use. And this was a very old school management company that didn't use any electronic anything. And they had assured me they could integrate and work with that and do it, but it just wasn't happening. The bookkeeping was behind, and it led to them not being able to pay me because they didn't know what they owed me, because they couldn't keep up with things. And that's not okay either. So I pretty quickly came to the realization, as if you want it done right, you have to do it yourself. And my friend who had become a syndicator in Minnesota, who I had done my first passive investment with, they had their own management company. And he explained it to me really succinctly that I think is so important. Owning your own management company is not about the profit that you get from operating that business. Owning your own management company is risk management. It's saying that if we have a vacancy, we can choose to fill it by pricing it right and turning it around quickly and doing it and making sure it's done, and not relying on a third party who may or may not do it. And that's not to say there's not great third-party management companies. And like my company is now one of them, but at the time I just hadn't found success with them. So that is the genesis of the company. And we went from just me and my partner, where he was my best friend from the MBA program looking for a job. And I said, I think this will pay like several $1,000s a month between all these, buildings I have to manage them. And what do you say? Why don't we start a company together, and you can do all the work and get all the income, and I'll just know that someone out there cares and is doing a good job, and I trust them. And that trust was huge, because this is a person I trusted 110%. He's a Navy veteran, 20-year career in the Navy. We knew old drinking buddies. We knew each other very well. So I knew that I'd be in good hands. So that's how we started Katahdin Property Management. And we now have 4 other employees, and we're managing buildings for other people. We've expanded our own portfolio of ones that I'm invested in to over 100 units. And we use bigger and better software now called AppFolio. And it's really an exciting process. And I wouldn't describe it as a full-time job, because I'm trying to work on the business, not in the business. And it's always a little of both, at least for me. I'm a cook that can't quite stay out of the kitchen. But eventually, as we get more people in definite roles and they're performing and doing those, then I'll be able to focus on other things like the investments we're trying to create in the future.
Let's get into this aspect of syndicating with the aspect of value add green energy.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, green energy may have different political strings attached to it, but it's not a left or right issue. It's an issue of, do you want to waste money or not? And that to me is very bipartisan, that we can all agree that we should save money. And so as a landlord, as a property owner, as a syndicator, your whole life is ruled by two different drivers in your property: your income, aka your rents, and your expenses. And in those expenses, there are a lot of hidden costs that relate to green energy. And in the Northeast, I mean, in anywhere in a northern climate where you have heating bills, a big one of them is heating. And a lot of times the landlord is paying for the heat. And that is a situation where you have huge opportunities to look to reduce or even eliminate that heating bill. And so I've done this probably 6 or 7 times now in buildings where I buy a building that's maybe spending 5 or 10 grand a year on heating, and they use an old oil burning furnace, a very dirty kind of fuel. It stinks, it's flammable, it's bad for the environment. Just everything that could be wrong is pretty much wrong with it, but it's the way we've always done it. And most people, when they buy a building, they're like, okay, here's the performa. I'm just going to do it the way it's always been done. And when that oil furnace needs an expensive repair, I'm going to pay the money and repair it. My philosophy is like, when that thing needs an expensive repair, I'm going to stab it with a fork. I'm going to kill it and switch to heat pumps, which allow each individual tenant to control their own heat, their own cooling. They pay their own electric bill, so they're now paying for their heat. We can even reduce their rent a little bit to make it easier on them in the transition. It's an amenity that you can advertise that people like and want. It filters the air from pollen, dust. It can dehumidify. There's so many things that a heat pump can do that an oil burning furnace can't. And if one heat pump in a 4-unit building breaks, you only have one tenant without heat. Whereas if your oil burning furnace breaks, your whole building is without heat. And in our environment, your pipes might freeze and burst, and that's an even bigger problem. That is a big way that we do well by doing good. And we're making tenants happy. We're reducing our own operating costs. And as many of your listeners know, if you reduce your expenses by a significant number, and that heating bill might have been 20 or 30% of your expenses annually. If you can eliminate that totally, you just put 100 grand of value in your building for a 20 grand project. It is a massive difference depending on the cap rate of the market and so forth, but you add huge amounts of value. So I find for every $1 I'm spending on heat pumps, I'm adding 5 or 10 to the value of the building. And tenants love it. So it's really a win-win. And there's incentives to do it as well, at both the federal level and in our state in Maine at the state level. So that's one thing. Another that's even more basic is insulation. In the Northeast, we have a lot of buildings that choose to heat their basements to prevent the pipes from freezing. And so why do they need to heat the basement if the temperature of the earth below the frost line is 55 degrees Fahrenheit? That's not 32. That's not freezing. It's because they let the basement be so leaky. They got these old leaky windows in there. They got a leaky door. They got cracks. You can see daylight through it. There's just air coming in from the January below freezing temperatures that threatens that basement to freeze. And so they keep heat running in the basement just to prevent that. All you have to do is insulate the basement. And we use spray foam insulation, which is both an air barrier and a vapor barrier. So if you had moisture and water coming through the wall, that gets prevented by the spray foam, although there's other issues that may cause. You talk to your basement drainage experts. But the long story short is that for a 5 or 10 grand spray foam insulation project, you can save 5 grand a year in heating costs. You have a 1-year payback on this. That's 100% return on your investment. And it's passive. It sits there. There's nothing to do. You're done. You can just stop paying for oil or gas to heat your basement because, again, the temperature that comes up out of the ground is 55. And as long as you don't let too much of that out, you'll be fine. So that's another really low-hanging fruit kind of thing that obviously in a warmer environment that may not apply, but there's other kinds of things like insulating the attic, reduce your cooling costs a lot. It keeps your roof life going a lot longer. If you let that roof get too hot, the shingles are going to crack and decay much quicker. A lot of basic things like that have a huge return on investment. So to me, that's like a bipartisan issue we can all rally around, is that this is not left or right, green or red. This is just being a good investor and a good landlord.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. As an industry-leading, relationship-focused, design-build construction firm, Mosaic Construction has worked in many different asset classes from multifamily to retail, medical, industrial, and commercial. Mosaic Construction works to execute interior and exterior renovations with their team of trades and project managers. Their experience with value-add improvements has resulted in increased ROI and long-term value of the assets. They work nationally in partnership with local trades to deliver thoughtful, problem-solving construction management solutions to all their clients. For a personal, no-obligation consultation, call Ira Singer, 773-491-3145, or email Ira at mosaicconstruction.net. You can also find Ira on LinkedIn. Yes, politics play a huge factor in terms of green energy. In fact, politics have set the United States back about 40 years behind Europe and other parts of the world. So we need to get our politics in line because it's costing us big time.
I agree. It's the technology of the future. So if you want to win the future, you got to be aggressive in this stuff. And we've deliberately chosen to subsidize fossil fuels, which we basically have known for a long time have no future. And I'm very sympathetic to the jobs those industries have and create. A job's a job. And if you want your 50 grand a year, let's get it from something that has a future, not something that doesn't. So I think that transition, it's happening because the market is making it happen. But you're right, politically, we've dragged our feet. And I see that as a bipartisan problem too. But China has eaten our lunch. They're the biggest producer of solar and wind. They're the biggest producer of electric cars. You go on down the list, the rare earth metals we need for all these renewable things, they're the only refiner. China and Europe have completely outshined us, and we've got some catching up to do.
Absolutely. And in terms of jobs, the biggest creators of jobs are in the renewable sector. People in the coal mine fields are frightened of losing their dirty, filthy jobs when they could be replaced by clean, better paying jobs. Wonderful to hear somebody in real estate talk about those things. Beyond that, you have a knack here, or a niche here, I guess I should say, for renting to refugees.
Yeah. Let me tell you about that, because that's not a podcast topic you'll probably hear from any other guest.
I'm sure I won't, yeah.
Up in Maine, we have a pretty large, the second largest in the country, Somali American community, both in Portland and a city called Lewiston or Lewiston, Auburn, that were settled in, the 90s, mid 90s, and other people from different African countries. And more recently, there was a big influx that crossed the Mexican border of refugees who were pursuing that legal status. And the word got through to them that Portland, Maine was a pretty good place to go, and they would take care of you and feed you and clothe you. So these busloads of refugees started coming to little Portland. And when the city got word that 300 people were about to show up in the town square with no housing and food or anything, it turned into a crisis. So they converted the local basketball stadium into an emergency shelter and had these families living there over the course of the summer of 2019. And I thought, I've got a vacancy in my unit. They need housing. Maybe there's a way to make this work. So I just called the city and said, hey, so I'm a landlord. I have a vacancy. And if there's any way they could ever pay rent or get the rent paid or something, I'd be willing to not care that they don't have a credit score, and I'm not going to get much in their criminal background. But if you think they're good people and can vouch for them, then, I would take them in my units if we can figure something out with rent. I can lose a month or two, but I can't lose a year or two. And sure enough, they said, the recent immigrants we have to wait on, but there's a family of Rwandan refugees who came with green cards, so they can work. And they're in our homeless shelter and taking up beds there because they just arrived, and they have some decent English. And we'll pay their first month's rent. And I think your local town and the state can pay the rest of the rent until they work. And I was like, brilliant, let's go. And then just as fate would have it, another apartment right across the hall from them in the same building opened up, and we took a second family of Rwandans. So we had two right next to each other. They both had young, infants, toddlers, so they could babysit. And I'll tell you, Alan, within 2 months, four of them had gotten jobs. They probably had 8 jobs between the 4 of them, several of which were at the college, Bowdoin, where I worked. And we walked them around, showed them the food pantry, all these resources we thought they'd need. They only had 2 months of subsidy before they were paying their own market rent. They were up on their feet so fast. And it was very refreshing because I deal with tenants who milk the system. There are tenants who are professional tenants and they don't want to work. That's the last thing on their minds. And this was the exact opposite, where they were hungry and thirsty to work. They wanted to start a new life, and they really did that. And the apartments were unfurnished. I just threw up a post on Facebook, said, hey, we're placing this family of refugees in our apartment. They have no furniture. Does anyone have stuff you could donate? And lo and behold, we got almost everything we needed donated to them. So we got beds and dressers because people have old stuff, and it felt very refreshing for people to actually be able to donate directly to the family that need, and like literally drop it off and meet them. Because when you give to the Red Cross, Salvation Army, Goodwill, these things, it's very indirect. You have no idea where your old shirts are going, like that kind of thing. Whereas here it's, oh my gosh, here they are. These people really need help. They're right in our community. I know and trust Dave. And so here we go, and just made the connection. And it was very gratifying to see people wanted a way to give. I provided it for them, but somewhat selfishly, these are going to be my tenants who are going to pay rent. I'll make a profit. And that was never a secret throughout all this. I'm not running a charity. I believe in charity. I think there's a great place for it, but that's not what I'm doing in real estate investing. But there's a market niche for this sort of thing where a lot of times if someone's a refugee, that local city government may be able and willing to pay their rent for a year until they get their work permit. And you should look into that, because rent's rent as a landlord. You shouldn't care where it comes from. And a lot of the stigmas people might have about, oh, they're going to be butchering chickens in the kitchen or whatever. Not true. They're better tenants than many of the ones I have who've lived in this country their whole life, because they're afraid of breaking any rules. They want to do it, and they're very eager to do the right thing. So it's worked out really well. There have been plenty of unusual hurdles with working with refugees that you wouldn't have in other tenant populations. There's a family that doesn't speak great English, and we have to go through a translator, things like that. It's not for everyone. It's not the easiest thing, but it is the most rewarding thing. And we've helped other families that are not refugees in different ways. A good example recently was a family was living in a hotel because they had lost their housing, and this is all they could do. They had bad credit. They and their kids were in a hotel, basically a step away from being homeless, and they're basically homeless. And so that's not usually the kind of tenant a landlord would take or want, because they have bad credit and they're homeless. But it just so happened that the guy had been hired as like an assistant by my handyman, who I trusted. And I was like, all right, if Ken's hired this guy as an assistant, there's something there. And we had good conversations with them and checked some of their former employment references. Like the mom seems to be a good hard worker. She's got a job at the local grocery store now, and her former job gave her a great review. And so we're like, yeah, we'll give them a chance. They don't have enough money for a down payment. We're like, okay, we'll work on that. We'll have them pay the down payment over the course of 4 months. And they did that. And it's worked out great. And they're now back down to the right rent amount. They're paying rent. They've done some improvements to the property. I've got a live-in handyman now that is very handy to have, and that can work. I've also given people chances and completely gotten burned by it and ended up in eviction. So you learn. If someone's been evicted before, I'm at the point where I can't let you in. Like other landlords will take you. I've been lenient in the past and been burned, so I'm not going to go down that road. So that one to me is the red line. If you've been evicted or had some major issue with a landlord, the chances of us working out are very low.
Well, Dave, before we go into the last segment of our program, share with our viewers and listeners how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. So I always offer out my personal cell phone. Very few people take advantage of it, but you're welcome to give me a ring. If I can't answer, I'll call you back. Just leave a message. It's 207-517-5700. Or you can email me at dave@holmanhomes.com, or just Google Holman Homes. That's Holman. So that's the syndication real estate agent business that I'm running, and happy to get in touch with anyone that would like to chat.
Dave, share with us one of your most difficult setbacks. How did you come through that time, and what have you learned from it?
Ooh, yeah. I saw a building come on the market that was really underpriced right in the downtown of this local town. Beautiful 4-story brick mansard. And they were only asking $1 million for it. And I was like, oh, that's easily a $2 million building. Like, I'm buying that. And so I went right down, said, hey, I'll offer you $1 million. Let me buy this building. They're like, great. And lo and behold, the building was like not only vacant, but like totally outdated. It had been vacant for decades up above. So there was no wiring, no plumbing, asbestos flooring, lead paint. And it was a small building, relatively speaking. It was only 12,000 square feet. And you could use historic tax credits to renovate it. But to figure out the renovation cost, you needed architectural drawings. So I started paying an architect and getting this together, and I started getting investors. And it was a very exciting project, but in retrospect, very advanced for someone who had just bought pre-existing multi-unit housing and had never done a historic tax credit renovation project or a syndication or a development project like this. And here I am trying to figure out federal and state tax credits and stuff. And I got pretty far into it over the course of 4 months. My earnest money was about to go hard. And I just looked at the pro forma of my good friend and syndicator, and it was just risky because everything had to go right for this thing to give you a pretty paltry 8% kind of return. But a lot could go wrong to make that return zero or even negative. And it was a very expensive project. It was going to be 18 months of construction. It was just long time, energy, money investment for a pretty marginal return. So I decided to back out. And it was a very expensive lesson that cost about as much as my MBA, which was luckily a state subsidized program, but still very expensive lesson. But I got great networking connections from it. It really accelerated me as an investor in a lot of neat ways. And it taught me a lot. And I think that building was one of the best investments I ever made. And I didn't buy it. And I'm glad I didn't buy it. And now a guy has bought it and he's pouring money into it. And I'm like, so long, because I bought several other buildings in that same downtown now for a quarter of what I would have paid on this one. They're just as big and give me just as great rents. And I would now feel more comfortable and I would know what I was getting into more. But that one was a very challenging project where I could have really exploded me as an investor. I could have lost the trust and confidence of people. But the key thing was I never took anyone's money and I never pulled the trigger and went green light on a project that I wasn't 100% confident was a good investment for my friends and family to put their hard-earned savings into. And I think they gained more trust in me because I backed out, because I was willing to say no to a project that my heart wanted to do, but my brain was flashing these warning signs that it's not a low enough risk project.
For what in your life do you feel most grateful?
The health of myself and my family. That really has to be it. I think this past year with coronavirus has taught us all, if we didn't know already, that you don't know your health, you have nothing. And I think that's what I'm most grateful for.
And what are 3 good things that have happened to you in the last 24 hours?
Ooh, this is a good question. In the last 24 hours, 3 good things. I've been able to connect a client with a potential purchase of a restaurant, and she'd be perfect for this restaurant. So that is really good. I turned down a call from a multi-millionaire who tries to call me at night, and I don't play that game. I'll work during the day for you, but I'm not going to work at night for you. So I'm happy about that. And the weather was warm. I was walking outside in shorts and a t-shirt, drinking a beer with my father-in-law and my son in the front yard. And it was just a wonderful evening. And today's a great day. So maybe that's more than 3, but those are some recent highlights.
There's no limit on good things. So how are you putting your success as an investor and entrepreneur to work to create universal well-being and abundance for all beings?
Primarily through your podcast. I think I try to go on shows and share what I've learned. I try to encourage and mentor younger investors or people just getting started. I don't have any official programs for that, but I think that by speaking with you, I'm not earning anything from this. I don't have a product that I'm pushing per se. I'm just trying to share experiences because you can learn from my mistakes and then you don't have to make them. So that's the beauty of these sort of shows where you can inform the audience, let them pick up some pearls of wisdom, hopefully among all the pearls of mud that I've also had. That's my reason for doing this.
When you leave this world, what do you want as your epitaph?
That's a great question. I expect I'll be cremated, so I won't have a headstone. There may not be an epitaph, but if there was, it would just be that he was a good father. I really take fatherhood as like my primary job, and I'm definitely deliberately putting career second to the extent I can. And it's always a balancing act, but I feel very grateful to be self-employed, especially during this pandemic when I can take a 15 or 30 minute break to go play with my daughter's little felt fairy dolls or play with my son's little trucks or something. And I think that's a real privilege.
Well, Dave, it has been a pleasure and an enlightenment. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Alan. I've really enjoyed this and hope we can talk again someday.
Thank you for tuning in to Real Estate Investing Abundance, brought to you by Steve Talker Capital, a company working for passionate professionals like you to develop financial independence built on solid, passive real estate investments. As part of our efforts to make the world a better place, Steve Talker Capital contributes to activities and organizations committed to better understand the equine. These endeavors attempt to enhance the human treatment of horses worldwide. Steve Talker Capital, working for a world where all creatures, great and small, flourish abundantly. For resources to develop your financial independence, connect with us at stevetalker.com.